Hello. I'm going to give a brief presentation of my book, Extended Rationality, A Hinge Epistemology. The book came out in 2015, and so it's already 5 years old. And in fact, I've written extensively in response to uh, comments made by various critics, and also to clarify some aspects of my thesis in the book, and actually also to expand and extend the framework, which is the extended rationality framework presented there, to other cases and forms of epistemic rationality. In fact, a book with my new papers is forthcoming, and I'm also writing another book on social hinge epistemology, so on the extension of the framework to issues in social epistemology such as disagreement, testimony, trust, and some applied philosophy having to do with epistemic injustice and also feminist issues. So let me share the screen with you. So very quickly, to give an overview, the starting point of my views in epistemology is this conception of perceptual justification, which I call the moderate conception of perceptual justification. I'm first and foremost interested in justification rather than knowledge. I think that this is due mostly to the fact that I was always interested in the problem of skepticism, which it seems to me arises mainly as a problem in which we are asked to provide reasons, justifications for our deep-seated beliefs about, for instance, the existence of an external world, or in other cases, the existence of other minds and so on. So what is this account, moderate account? It's a kind of midway path between two different accounts of perceptual justification. One is the liberal account, the other one is the conservative account. And I think that, for instance, Jim Pryor has been the main proponent of the liberal account, whereas Crispin Wright, for instance, is the main contemporary proponent of the conservative account. So according to liberals, a belief about specific material objects that feel like here's a hand is perceptually justified if and only if absent the features one has the appropriate course of experience. So you have to have this kind of experience as of a hand in front of you, and if you don't have the features, that is enough to justify your belief, here's my hand. I think this kind of account is too weak because the same course of experience is possible in cases of perceptual hallucination, and it has been maintained by many that it actually makes it more probable I'm hallucinating having a hand here. So how do we favor the good belief that there is really my hand here if it's just based on a kind of experience which as such could even raise the probability of a belief that is incompatible with it's my hand is here, like I'm hallucinating having a hand here, or I'm a BIV having hallucinating a hand. The other account of perceptual justification, as I said, is the conservative account. It has it that a belief about specific material objects that P is perceptually justified if and only if absent the features. Not only does one have the appropriate course of experience, but one is also justified in assuming that there is an external world and possibly other general propositions such as my sense organs work mostly reliably, I'm not the victim of massive cognitive deception, I'm not a BIV, and so on. I think that this account definitely corrects the problem with the liberal account, but it's too strong because it requires a justification for these heavyweight assumptions, as Trotsky used to call them, such as that there are physical objects, that our organs are working mostly reliably, and so on. And here I don't have time to talk about that, but it's definitely very difficult to provide such a justification for these heavy weight assumptions. If we choose to go down kind of Morian path where we try to derive a justification for there is an external world from an argument that starts with the justified premise, here's my hands, then on this account we are actually entitled to have a justification for the premise only as much as we already have a justification for the conclusion. So the argument would be circular and could not provide a justification to believe that there is an external world. And if we go down an a priori path and try to justify there is an external world a priori, this proves incredibly difficult and, to the best of my knowledge, no satisfactory a priori justification for that belief has ever been provided. So the moderate account, as I said, is a midway path. It has it that a belief about specific material objects that P is perceptually justified if and only if absent defeaters, one has the appropriate course of experience, and it is assumed that there is an external world. So we need the assumption that we are in the good case scenario in which we are actually interacting with physical objects, we are not BIBs, and our sense organs are working reliably at least most of the time. But that assumption need not be further justified. That allows us, on the one hand, to avoid the problems that beset the liberal account, and on the other hand, to avoid the problem of providing justification for there is an external world and similar beliefs. That is the problem that afflicts conservative accounts. I call these heavyweight assumptions hinges, and my hinges differ from Wittgenstein's in as much as they are very general propositions, which are those and only those that allow us to surpass our cognitive locality. That is, that allow us to bring our experiences to bear onto beliefs about physical objects that are taken to exist independently of our minds. Similar things could be said about other kinds of hinges that allow us to surpass our cognitive locality and, for instance, talk about other people's minds, but I will not go into that. And to assume that there is an external world at the propositional level, at the level of propositional justification, means the following, that the proposition in question, namely, there is an external world, figures among the ingredients of a propositional justification for empirical beliefs in the abstract space of reason. So it's not something that needs to be entertained by subjects. Nevertheless, when asked to provide a justification for our ordinary empirical beliefs, we can, if we have the conceptual repertoire, appeal to that assumption. And that's what we normally do, not only as philosophers, but also, I think, as adult human beings if challenged. Now, I think that moderates are legion, if we look at the history of philosophy a little bit at least. So naturalists in various fashions, such as Hume in some moods, and Wittgenstein are moderates, so they allow for the possibility that there be justifications for ordinary empirical beliefs, but they certainly do not require that there is an external world, for instance, or there are physical objects be independently justified, but they also do require them to be in place. Certainly, according to so-called framework readings of Wittgenstein's uncertainty, he held that view and considered propositions such there is an external world as hinges and assigned to them kind of grammatical rule-like role. I will not go into that here. Pragmatists such as Peirce have this view as well, and at most they provide pragmatic justifications for these hinges or heavyweight assumptions, but certainly they don't require epistemic justifications for them to be correctly assumed. I think that all these views are interesting as much as they show that the moderate position has been held by many, and it's even held today, I think, by Ernie Souza, for instance, in his most recent writings, although he has a kind of externalist virtue theoretic framework in which this moderate position, as I call it, is embedded. But I think that these positions that I've listed here on the slide are weak in the sense that they don't have a response to the skeptical challenge. Because it remains that for skeptics of a human persuasion in particular, we are entitled to assume that there is an external world just as much, just insofar as we have a justification for that belief. So what do we respond to that challenge? How do we respond to that challenge? None of these views responds to that and really bites the bullet and says that it's just part of our nature to do so. It's part of, at most we have pragmatic justifications, but they don't meet the human skeptical challenge. They don't confront it, as it were, either directly or indirectly, as we will see. Before going back to how I develop an answer to that kind of skeptical challenge, let me point out a few important consequences of my view. First of all, I identify a new kind of transmission failure, according to which an argument such as Moore's argument fails to transmit warrant or justification from its premises to the conclusion, just in case its conclusion needs to be assumed in order to have a justification for its premises. So here the idea is that even if a justification for the reason external world is not required in order for you to justifiably believe here's my hand based on your current visual experience as of a hand, the argument that goes from here's my hand to there is an external world is question begging, circular, or exhibits transmission failure, because its assumption, its conclusion needs to be assumed in order for you to have a justification for its premises in the first place. For connoisseurs of the literature on transmission failure, this is a slightly different account of transmission failure from Crispin Wright's. I don't think the two accounts are in opposition to one another. They actually complement one another, but mine is more interesting and philosophically important because it really targets philosophical relevant arguments such as Moore's argument and others that may exhibit a similar form, where in the end we have heavyweight assumptions as conclusions. It also follows that we see that there are exceptions to the closure principle, because it's perfectly possible, given the moderate account of perceptual justification, to have a justification for here's my hand. We know that if there is my hand here, then there is an external world, and yet we don't have knowledge or justification for the conclusion. So there are cases in which the closure principle fails. And typically philosophers react by saying, oh, if you deny closure, then terrible things are going to happen to you. But actually, most logical principles, doesn't matter which kind of logic you are considering, admit of exceptions or need to be applied in a restricted domain. So even modus ponens for some people can only be applied in certain domains, and so for double negation elimination or even the principle of non-contradiction. So really what I'm saying is not that closure doesn't hold, but I'm saying that while it holds for cases in which the conclusion is not an heavyweight assumption, namely something that we need to assume in order to have a justification for the premises, it doesn't hold when that is the case, namely when the assumption of the conclusion is needed in order to have a justification for the premises. So what I'm actually saying is only that the domain of application of the closure principle is restricted, not that closure doesn't hold at all. And, just since we are in this kind of situation where there are people interested for sharing virtue epistemology, actually Ernest Sosa in his latest writings reaches a very similar conclusion. So this just summarizes what I've just said. And then let's move on quickly to the Humean skeptical challenge. As I see it, it consists of two separate or challenges that or at least challenges that we can separate and respond to differently. The first challenge says that since no epistemic justification for our basic beliefs or hinges or heavyweight assumptions can be obtained, then they are not epistemically rationally held. They are held simply because of our psychological constitution or for other non-epistemic factors such as pragmatic factors, broadly understood, which make it natural for us in virtue of our animal nature or of our acquired second nature to hold on to these assumptions. The second challenge is that if these heavyweight assumptions are not epistemically justified, then ordinary empirical beliefs are not epistemically justified either. And in order to answer the second challenge first, I think it's enough to notice that closure doesn't hold unrestrictedly, in particular doesn't hold when the conclusion is a hinge proposition due to the kind of transmission failure that I mentioned before, that here I still have the number 2 to distinguish it from Wright's version, and to the moderate account of perceptual justification. The moderate account tells you that it's enough for you in order to have a justification for here's a hand to assume that there is an external world while having the appropriate course of experience absent defeaters. So we can definitely have a justification for here's a hand. And then since closure doesn't hold, even if, at least in these cases, even if we don't have a justification for there is an external world, that doesn't mean that we would end up having no justification for the first premise by contraposing on this argument. So I think that we can definitely respond to that challenge. Some people that are versed in the history of modern philosophy told me that actually Hume himself didn't think that ordinary empirical beliefs would end up being unjustified. I don't have the required knowledge to assess that claim, but if you're interested in the history of philosophy, you can look more into that. But I definitely think that my own version of hinge epistemology can respond to that kind of problem. What then is needed is a response to the first challenge, namely the challenge that says that if you don't have an epistemic justification for these hinge assumptions, then they are not rationally held. And in a sense, they may even be arbitrary. So what notion of rationality is at play then in this kind of case for that challenge to be possible? Well, what I call epistemic rationality is skeptic, the kind of notion of epistemic rationality endorsed by skeptics, according to which it is epistemically rational to believe all and only perceptually justified propositions, at least when we are dealing with beliefs about mid-sized objects in our surroundings based on our sensory perceptions. To that notion of epistemic rationality, I oppose the notion of extended rationality, according to which it is epistemically rational to believe perceptually justified propositions such as is my hand based on our current sensory experience, and to accept those unjustifiable assumptions that make the acquisition of perceptual justifications possible in the first place and are therefore constitutive of epistemic rationality. So if I'm correct in my analysis of the structure of perceptual justification, that kind of justification is only possible insofar as certain assumptions are made. So they are constitutive of epistemic rationality, because without making them, we couldn't provide any epistemic justification for any of our ordinary empirical beliefs. And what I'm saying is that while we may well not have justifications for these heavyweight assumptions, they are constitutive of epistemic rationality, and for that reason, they fall within epistemic rationality itself. To exclude them from epistemic rationality, which is what skeptics are doing here, since they are basically confining themselves to the first half of this definition, is a mistake. And to see why it is a mistake, I think it's useful to think about the following analogy with games. Games consist and are identified and individuated by the moves that you can make within them and their rules, their constitutive rules. So, it's the constitutive rule of soccer that if you, under certain conditions, kick the ball into the goal of your opponent's team, your opponents, then you have scored for your team. If you change that rule, then soccer would inevitably be different. And one could even say that it wouldn't be soccer anymore. Now, it would be, I think, outrageous to say that these kind of constitutive rules are not part of the game, even if they are not moves in the game, of course. They are so much part of the game that without them, the game would not even exist, or wouldn't be the game it is. Similarly, I think that the assumptions which make it possible for us to have the basic practice or method of acquiring epistemic justifications for ordinary empirical beliefs are part of this kind of practice and game. They are constitutive of it, and we should not exclude them from it. So, since epistemic rationality, the very notion of epistemic rationality is not something, in my view, that comes, it's written in stone. I don't believe in, absolute, in the sense, in the etymological sense of being mind-independent truths about, concepts like epistemic rationality. I think they are grounded in our practices that have developed for whatever reason, but that is part of their genealogy and history. It's not part of their justification. I think that once we realize that this practice is possible only thanks to these basic assumptions that are therefore constitutive of it, we are required and in fact mandated to make these assumptions for epistemic rationality to be possible. And so I think that epistemic rationality extends beyond perceptually justified beliefs to those assumptions that make the acquisition of those very beliefs possible in the first place. So epistemic rationality, properly understood, actually mandates the assumption of these background presuppositions, which are constitutive of it. And this obviously is against skepticism, because, or the second kind of challenge, or actually first in my original numbering, that we saw in Humean skepticism. These are not arbitrary assumptions. These are not assumptions that fall outside the remit of epistemic rationality either. They are within epistemic rationality and actually mandated by epistemic rationality itself, and are also something to which skeptics themselves are committed, because they are, at least at this point in the dialectic, they are allowing for the fact that, and the possibility that we have epistemic justifications for our ordinary empirical beliefs, such as here's my hand. So in as much as they allow for that, they are actually, however, inadvertently committed to these assumptions, and that's what I'm basically claiming. So just to be clear, an epistemic rational mandate is not a justification. So we are not providing anything that supports the truth of there is an external world. In that sense, it's not a justification. It's not a right-style entitlement for reasons that I explore in the book, and I don't have time to develop here. It's just what we are mandated or required to do by epistemic rationality itself once we understand what epistemic rationality is and how it works and what makes it possible. See, all this kind of philosophical argument that I've been giving gives us an a priori justification, not to believe the truth of the proposition there is an external world, but to believe the truth or to believe that it's true, a different kind of proposition, namely, it is epistemically rational to assume that there is an external world, even though we have no epistemic justification for that proposition. There is an external world. So here is a chart in which I map the various positions. For skeptics, there is an external world is not justifiable, evidentially or otherwise. And so it's actually not rational. On a different account of epistemic, on a different account of perceptual justification, we have it that it is epistemically justified through something like Moore's proof. According to right-style response, conservatism, and response to skepticism, we have a non-evidential justification or warrant for such a proposition. And on my view, this proposition is not justified epistemically, evidentially or otherwise, but it's nevertheless part of epistemic rationality. So probably, in this chart, the one that distances ourselves the most from the skeptical understanding of epistemic rationality and of what it takes to have perceptual justification. The kind of response that I'm giving to skepticism is not a direct response. A direct response would exhibit perceptual justifications, or at least evidential justifications, or maybe even a priori justifications for the belief that there is an external world. It belongs to the kind of so-called indirect responses to skepticism. Those that acknowledge that epistemic justifications for these heavyweight assumptions are not attainable still offer a diagnosis of why this would not have the disastrous consequences that skeptics think it would have. So, as we saw, the fact that we don't have justification for ordinary empirical beliefs doesn't follow, given moderatism, my account of transmission failure and my account of when closure doesn't hold. The first challenge, namely that these assumptions would turn out to be arbitrary and non-epistemically rational, is met by noticing that the lack of epistemic justifications for them doesn't make them fall outside the scope of epistemic rationality once the notion of epistemic rationality is understood properly. So the diagnosis is that the skeptic works with too narrow a notion of epistemic rationality, and that's where the skeptic goes astray. So I think that is all. Thank you very much, and now we can have our Q&A.